Air travel is definitely one of the safest mode of transportation today. The air industry has grown so advanced that for less than $100, we can buy an air ticket. Though it is safer to travel today than in the past, we still hear tragic news of air crashes, some with total fatality. This video shows 7 international passenger air crashes with 0 survivors, from the 1990s to today. You will be surprised to know that these 7 crashes do not involve budget airlines but are full-fledged, popular international airlines. On May 31 in 2009, Air France Flight 447 departed from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil at 7:29 p.m. local time, scheduled for Paris. It was an Airbus A330 that was delivered to Air France only in 2005, which made it only a 4-year-old plane. It was Air France's latest and newest airplane at the time of the crash. This is a tragedy that shook the French aviation history and is the deadliest accident involving an Airbus A330, which is otherwise known as a safe aircraft. Only 3 hours into the flight, which was flying through a storm in the Intertropical Convergence Zone, it stopped making contact with the air traffic control. An Intertropical Convergence Zone is around the thermal equator, an area where the northeast and southeast winds converge because of its monotonous and windless weather. Within only a short span of 4 minutes, the Airbus plummeted 38,000 feet, went into a free-fall, plunged belly first and crashed straight into the Atlantic Ocean in the early hours of June 1, 2009, with its engines fully running but its wings losing lift. There were 216 passengers, 9 cabin crew and 3 flight crew. The accident claimed the lives of all 228 people who were on board. In July 2012, 3 years after the fatal crash, the French BEA released a final report with the conclusion of the investigation. It took a rigorous 22-month-long underwater search and at a cost of $35 million. There were 3 pilots, 58-year-old main captain Dubois, 37-year-old first officer co-pilot Robert, and 32-year-old first officer co-pilot Bonin, dubbed as the company's baby. The black box unlocked the mystery of what happened and revealed very, very shocking cockpit secrets. When things started happening, the main captain Dubois was sleeping, and the only guy in control in the cockpit was the company's baby Bonin. The slightly more experienced co-pilot Robert was, at that time, the pilot not flying. It was scandalously exposed that the veteran Captain Dubois had only an hour of sleep before the flight because he spent most of the night with an off-duty flight attendant. What really happened was the plane's pitot tubes, which are used to measure the flow of speed, became obstructed with ice crystals. As more and more ice hit the plane, the pitot tubes were totally knocked out, leading to faulty readings by the plane, which then caused the autopilot to be disconnected totally. Bonin, in a state of panic as plane was joisted by turbulence and with the autopilot being off, he pulled up the nose of the plane trying to slow it down. This was the fatal mistake. This action caused the entire plane to enter into an aerodynamic stall. One alarm after another lit up the cockpit system. Instead of fixing Bonin's mistake, Robert was trying to wake the sleeping Dubois. 1 minute and 38 seconds later, Dubois finally entered the cockpit, but it was all too late. The plane had stalled and nothing could be reversed. It is an exposed secret that pilots had long depended on autopilot mode, and most may not even be trained on what to do during an emergency. The investigators described Bonin's action behind the controls as excessive. According to BEA Director Jean-Paul Toadec, the situation was salvageable, and the pilots did essentially the opposite of what they should have done to save the plane. It was notably bad decisions taken by the pilots among other reasons for the crash. However, human errors aside, the Airbus was found to be prone to icing over a few models, and the new parts had been ordered to replace the current ones. According to the chief investigator in 2012, If the captain had stayed in position through the intertropical convergence zone, it would have delayed his sleep by no more than 15 minutes. And because of his experience, maybe the story would have ended differently. This, unfortunately, also happened over the Atlantic Ocean. On 2nd of September 1998, Swissair Flight 111, codeshare with Delta Airlines, departed New York at 8:18 p.m. local time, heading for Geneva in Switzerland. The aircraft was a McDonnell Douglas MD-11. Manufactured only in 1991, the aircraft was only 7 years old when it crashed, and Swissair was its only operator. The fatal crash, which claimed the lives of all 229 on board, was the deadliest MD-11 accident in the aviation history ever. There were 215 passengers, with 12 crew and 2 pilots. Barely just 53 minutes into the flight, the pilots detected an abnormal odor in the cockpit. Slight smoke was seen coming from the air conditioning system in the cabin. As quickly as it started, both the odor and smoke stopped. However, 4 minutes later, the odor returned, and this time smoke was coming out from the ceiling of the cockpit. The pilots then made a pan-pan radio call to the air traffic control. Pan-pan is an international signal that indicates an urgent problem in the aircraft, but not yet an emergency. The flight crew then requested for a diversion to land in Boston, some 269 miles away, and what they thought was convenient. The air control advised them to land in Nova Scotia instead, which was only 76 miles away. The crew then accepted the offer and proceeded towards Nova Scotia. However, the pilots thought the plane might be too heavy for such an emergency landing and requested to dump fuel, in which they made a detour southwards to St. Margaret's Bay, where it was safe to do so. And since it was only 46 miles from the Halifax International Airport in Nova Scotia, they thought it was near and safe. However, they did not realize the gravity of the situation when making the detour. One by one, within minutes, the plane's instruments started to fail. The autopilot was disconnected, the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder, and the entire electrical power of the plane, they all failed. The cockpit was filled with smoke by then, and it was impossible to fly the aircraft. The communication was lost for 6 minutes, and the plane crashed upside down at 10:31 local time into the Atlantic Ocean near Nova Scotia and broke apart upon impact. The TSB of Canada concluded the investigation in 2003 after an extensive 5-year search costing $43 million, after 98% of the wreckage was found. The retrieved parts were so badly damaged and provided so few clues that it was impossible for the investigators to make any conclusion at all. Investigators were left with no choice but to painstakingly reconstruct a 36-foot-long segment of the MD-11's front end, and with all the retrieved parts, just hoping to shed any light on any possible causes. They managed to come to the conclusion that the fire broke out in the hidden area above the cockpit. The fire was possibly due to a fuse that was connected to the newly installed in-flight entertainment system, which had blown above the cockpit. The insulation material used was so flammable that it caused the fire to spread so rapidly to the cabin and possibly to the entire plane, all without the immediate knowledge of anyone in the plane at all, as it was concealed in the ceiling. They could only see smoke creeping out from the air conditioning vents. The fire then caused everything that was needed to fly a plane to go into a massive shutdown. The pilots needed to fly manually, but it was impossible because by then, the entire cockpit was already filled with smoke. The flammable insulation material in question was metallized polyethylene terephthalate, or MPET in short. MPET actually met the inadequate flammability certification standard, which means the material should never even have been used in the first place. The TSB cleared the flight crew of any wrongdoing. They concluded that even if the plane had not diverted to dump fuel, it would still have been unable to reach Halifax Airport. Swissair, a 71-year-old airline, collapsed and went into bankruptcy in 2002. TWA Flight 800 took off from New York at 8:19 p.m. local time on July 17, 1996. It was due to arrive in Rome with a stopover in Paris. Just barely 12 minutes after departure at about 8:31 p.m., the Boeing 747 suddenly exploded in mid-air at an altitude of about 13,700 feet and crashed straight into the Atlantic Ocean near Long Island. As it was a mid-air explosion, the aircraft broke into pieces before hitting the water. The center section of the plane fell first, then the forward body, then the wings, and lastly the remainder of the fuselage. It instantly killed all 230 people on board, comprising of 212 passengers, 14 cabin crew, 2 pilots, and 2 flight engineers. A 4-year probe costing an estimated $100 million by several agencies concluded the explosion was due to a design flaw in the fuel tank. Citing from the conclusion report released by the National Transportation Safety Board of the US, the probable cause of the accident was an explosion of the center wing fuel tank resulting from ignition of the flammable fuel-air mixture in the tank. The aircraft was parked on the tarmac with its air conditioning turned on for several hours, due to a 2-hour delay before takeoff, as the generators for the air conditioning system were located directly beneath the central fuel tank. By the time the plane took off, the generators could have been so heated up that the temperature inside the tank may have reached 52 degrees, which is considered way too hot. The actual source of the ignition could not be determined with certainty, but with the sources evaluated by the investigation, the most likely cause would be a short circuit outside of the center fuel tank that allowed excess voltage to enter it through electrical wiring associated with the fuel quantity indication system. The result of the investigation was slammed by many aviation experts who maintain that airplanes do not just explode in mid-air. This, plus the fact that some eyewitnesses saw an object hitting the plane, produced many conspiracy theories that the authorities were trying to cover up something, that the result was a lie, and that it had actually been shot down by missiles. Also, the FBI was involved, which usually they do not get themselves involved in air crash investigation. As it happened near the shore of Long Island, there were as many as 700 over eyewitnesses. It was reported that some even saw a streak of light move towards the plane before it crashed. Unfortunately, till today, even with the much criticized investigation officially closed, this actual cause of the explosion probably still remains a mystery to many. Flight 370 took off from Kuala Lumpur Airport in Malaysia at 12:42 a.m. local time on the 8th of March in 2014. It was due to fly to Beijing in China. Barely 45 minutes into the flight, its captain said a good night to the air traffic control. And then, 2 minutes later, the aircraft's transponder suddenly stopped functioning, causing the flight to disappear from the radar of the air traffic control, and that was around 1:22 a.m. However, the Malaysian military radar managed to track the plane and found that it veered slightly off course to the left. And then, an hour later, at 2:22 a.m., the entire aircraft disappeared from the military radar. Just like that, the entire flight carrying 239 people, comprising of 227 passengers and 12 flight and cabin crew, vanished from the surface of the earth, presumed dead, with no bodies found. Though it had been 5 years, the search for the missing MH370 continues. It remains the most extensive search ever in history for an aviation accident. So far, it had already cost upwards of $200 million and still counting. There were only 2 pieces of debris found that were recognized to be from the missing aircraft. However, there are many theories to debunk that, and many are not convinced that they are really from the missing flight. Therefore, till today, there is still no conclusion for the missing MH370. This remains the biggest aviation mystery ever. How could such a big aircraft, a Boeing 777, disappear just like that? American Airlines Flight 587 was scheduled to depart from JFK Airport in the US to the Dominican Republic on November 12, 2001. It took off around 9:14 p.m. local time and just 1 minute and 40 seconds after a JAL flight that was in front. Before reaching even 5,000 feet, the aircraft hit wake turbulence from the JAL flight which was in front of it. Wake turbulence is turbulence that forms behind an aircraft as it passes through air, and all aircraft produce wake turbulence. So since all aircraft produce wake turbulence, why did Flight 587 crash then? This is because, unfortunately, in an attempt to stabilize the plane, the first officer very aggressively alternated the rudder between left and right. Compare this to a steering wheel of a car. If you turn it from left to right and then right to left repeatedly and aggressively for 20 seconds. This alternating aggressive movements caused the vertical stabilizer, that is the tail fin of the aircraft, to break, and it fell straight into Jamaica Bay. 8 seconds later, because the tail fin, which is supposed to be the stabilizer of the plane, is gone, the pilots lost control of the entire aircraft and it went straight into a flat spin. Both the engines broke off from the plane, and the fuselage, that is the body of the aircraft, slammed right into Bell Harbor, instantly destroyed 3 houses and killed 5 other people who were on the ground. All this happened within a shocking 103 seconds. Flight 587 was an Airbus A300. There were 0 survivors. All 251 passengers with 9 crew along with 5 people on the ground were killed instantly. This is the second deadliest air crash in the US after American Airlines Flight 191, which occurred in 1979. The NTSB of the US concluded the crash was due to the action of the first officer and there were no design flaws in the plane. In the morning of July 17 in 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 departed from Amsterdam to Malaysia. It was flying over eastern Ukraine in an area controlled by pro-Russian rebels, where it was shot down and the aircraft slammed right into the ground near the Ukraine-Russia border, instantly killing the 15 crew and 283 passengers who were on board. Fingers had been pointing to Ukraine and Russia, but neither country assumed responsibility. 5 years later, this year in 2019, 4 suspects, that is 3 Russians and 1 Ukrainian, had been charged. Australia and the Netherlands have both officially held Russia responsible. However, with Russia rejecting the findings from the Dutch Safety Board, will these guys even face trial? We are talking about a large Boeing 777 here. Who supplied these guys with missiles to fly that high and strong enough to blast a Boeing 777 completely? This area is notorious for gunning down military jets. Several military jets were gunned down in the months before the fatal crash of the Flight 17. Why would a passenger plane be flying in an airspace where it's full of airstrikes? Wouldn't this be classified as a no-fly zone? This is the worst ever mid-air collision. The Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 was a Boeing 747 passenger airplane carrying 289 passengers and 23 flight and cabin crew. They fly the same route 3 times a week, so this flight path is no stranger to the pilots. The other aircraft, which was an Ilyushin 76, was a chartered flight operated by the Kazakhstan Airlines. It was carrying 37 people, comprising 27 passengers and 10 crew members. This mid-air crash happened on the 12th of November in 1996 around 6:35 p.m. local time in New Delhi, India. Now, most airports in the world would have different paths separating the ascending and descending aircrafts, right? Not in the case of the New Delhi airport at the time of the crash. Planes flying up and planes coming down share the same single path. Not only do they share the same path, they are not equipped with technology to know what height they are flying at. It was all based on estimation. For additional information, the rest of the airspace was used by the Indian Air Force. So what happened? The Saudi Flight 763 was ascending and cleared by the air control tower to climb to 14,000 feet. At the same time, the chartered Kazakhstan 1907, which was descending and therefore traveling in the opposite direction, reported to the air control tower that it had reached 15,000 feet. Now, assuming that the reported heights were accurate and pilots followed, the distance of 1,000 feet between 2 flying aircrafts seemed to be of acceptable and safe distance. But what if it happened at a time when the estimates were based on human? Unfortunately, the Kazakhstan plane was not at 15,000 feet. It was actually lower, at 14,500 feet and still descending. And just like that, both airplanes crashed into each other in mid-air, with both pilots seeing the approaching plane but could do nothing. It was not a head-on collision as evident from the crash pieces of the aircraft. The tail of the Kazakhstan 1907 cut through the left wing and horizontal stabilizer of the Saudi 763. This then caused the Saudi plane to instantly lose control and went straight into a rapid descending spiral motion with fire trailing from the wing. It broke up while still in mid-air and the wreckage hit the ground. The chartered aircraft remained intact while it crashed at a tremendous speed in the field. The speed at impact was at least 500 km an hour, which is huge given that head-on car crashes at 70 km per hour can already kill. Witnesses on the ground said they saw fireballs in the sky, and the sky lit up in flames. They also heard sounds louder than thunder, but they were all gone within seconds. Investigation concluded that the ultimate fault was in the Kazakhstan's pilot who flew below 15,000 feet without permission. On the other hand, because of the lack of technology upgrade in the India's aviation system, there was no way to know if planes were at their reported altitude. There were other aviation disasters that took more lives, but those were before the 90s. We hope with technological advancements, there will be much less air crashes in the future. Thank you for watching, and we have come to the end of another episode. We need your support to grow. Please subscribe to us and give a like if you liked the video. A nice comment would be appreciated.